Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discovering the Landscapes of Glenstone. We are joined by Matthew Partain, the Grounds Superintendent of the internationally renowned Glenstone Museum in Potomac. As I said, please remain muted during the presentation. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And also, if you feel more comfortable, you can put your questions in the chat and we can read them for you. So, Matt, whenever you're ready, you can begin.
All right, great. Thank you. And now the magic moment, sharing a screen. All right, success. Okay, hello everyone. Like we just heard, I'm Matt Partain, the Landscape Superintendent at Glenstone. And we're going to talk about a couple of things about Glenstone. This is kind of a preview for your upcoming visit. So I know you're going to be coming in a few weeks. I know many of you have already been to Glenstone, so I'm going to go in depth on a sculpture that we'll be working on soon, which is Split Rocker. Will be in the next few weeks. There'll be activity. We may not be, it won't be fully planted, but there may be some planting going on. We'll definitely be blending the flowers, and we'll talk about that. And we're going to give an overview about some of the methods that we do on the property to try to get some of the understory developed. And then we'll go over some of those concepts and show you what you'll be looking at. Who am I? Well, first of all, this is broadcast live from Bodmer and Butler in Poolesville, as I live in Poolesville with my wife Gail and two children, Jack and Henry, and they're in 9th and 7th grade at John Poole and high school. So I'm landscape superintendent. I've been at Glenstone about 7.5 years. Real focus on horticulture, landscape design, maintenance. 15 years professional experience after University of Georgia, working at Walt Disney World, Biltmore Estate, Greenbrier Resort, so some pretty high-end horticultural resorts. And then Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. There's a big focus on sustainability there, and kind of brought all of that together, and then came to Glenstone for this opportunity, this big expansion that we'll touch on that. My passion is developing organic long-term native landscapes, and our team is of 16 associates. What is Glenstone Museum? So we're post-World War II contemporary art, founded by Mitchell and Emily Rails in 2006. They're still our active founders at Glenstone, which is a really awesome opportunity to be at a place that's developing with founders still present. Admission's always free to the public Thursday through Sunday. We started out 35 acres. Now we're almost 300, though about 175 of that is kind of in guest use right now. So we're, like I say, we're still expanding, lots of opportunity for the future. We focus on organic grounds maintenance. We also focus on using native plants. We do require scheduled visits, but we have guaranteed admission for students, 12 and up, educators, active and veteran military, and museum professionals, and if you take the ride on bus. So if you do any of that, you don't need reservations. You show up and you can have a +1, and then you just go right in, no problem. And glenstone.org for more information, or you can follow us on social media at Glenstone Museum. All right, a little timeline of the property. So 2006, this is the top right-hand box. That's the gallery. That was the original museum. That's where it all started. And that's when we were the smaller 20, 30 acre property. Guests came in on their cars. They parked on the road near the gallery. They had a guide meet them, walked into the gallery with them, walked around the property with the guide. And then they walked back to their car, and then they left. And that was the whole experience. And then in 2013, Split Rocker opened up living sculpture, which we'll go into detail about that. Really cool feature on top of the hill overlooking the property. And then the huge expansion, this is the reason I came to Glenstone in 2015, was opening the pavilions, and that opened in October of 2018. So that got us up to the 175. It massively larger than the gallery in the picture. You can kind of see the overlook of the property from there. And it really allowed us to showcase a lot of art. And about that time, around the 2013, was when we started going native. So originally the gallery was not native landscapes, but with the pavilions opening, we really focused on the native stuff. You know, we planted 8,000 trees for this expansion, and we still plant, since 2018, we still plant at least 1,000 trees a year. And so that's every year since we've opened the pavilions. That's a big push that we make sure we do. Different size trees. The trees are a lot smaller now than they used to be. To open the museum, they were much bigger because we were trying to get that property ready for guests. What we try to do at Glenstone is integrate art, architecture, nature. So we want you to come, we want you to experience those three things. A lot of times we want those three things to intermingle, and we want you to have all that together. So I've just got a couple overview pictures. You know, it's nice when you're working outside. It's super nice now with these cameras on the phones, which have been here for many years, but you can capture all kinds of images. That's Charles Ray, horse and rider sculpture, outside one of our main intersections of campus with the pavilions. And then at the right, this was a really cool sunrise over the pools at the gallery. Tony Smith Smug, and that's one of the original sculptures from the property. That's Father Gill of Mount Airy. You know it's a gardener taking pictures when you see 75% plants in the picture, and you see whatever 25% of the art. So I'm taking a picture of the art, but I'm really taking a picture of this fall color of the Father Gilla, which was just fantastic. That's Father Gilla Mount Airy with Tony Smith Smug, which is a really cool piece in the background. And then on the right is Richard Serre's Contour 290. And that's some of our native meadow. We have 45 acres of native meadow that we've been developing since 2016 and 2018. And this is a nice successful piece of that meadow. We've got both successful meadow and less successful meadow, but that's kind of when you have 45 acres to be expected. Here we go, Robert Gover, 2 partially buried sinks. That's on our boardwalk, which leads to the bridle trail. We were talking about that earlier. And that is a cool understory. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I'm going to make jokes. It's tough to make jokes because everyone, you can't see anyone, but I'm still going to make them. That's a great understory called stiltgrass. And so that's my joke. Stiltgrass is a terrible invasive plant that loves the shade woodlands of this area. And we try things to combat it. It's really tough in some places. This is an area it's hard to take over with, but we're working on trying to get some native plants in there to see if we can find things that can work with that particular plant. But it is a dominant understory of the woods. Unfortunately, it is a pretty grass, but it is very invasive. And then Richard Serre Sylvester under our nice large, we call it a Spanish oak, but it's really a southern red oak. It's a native oak tree. And to give you something, you know, this picture wasn't taken this year. This was a previous year because we had no snow, but this is Michael Heiser compression line, and in a nice landscape amphitheater behind it, which is a really cool feature. And then our whole pavilions museum surrounds this in this water courtyard. And this is a 265,000 gallon water courtyard in the middle of the pavilions. So really, and you can also kind of see from this picture that the museum it's sunk down in the landscape. So you enter in up top, then you come down the stairway, and the first thing you see is that big window. You're looking out of the window into the water courtyard. That's John Sander, our aquatic technician, in his spot down there, cleaning up the plants. But it's really nice. You go in all these rooms surrounding the water courtyard. Every time you leave a room and you're looking at contemporary art, you get to reset yourself with this water feature. So really nice way to start your relationship with the pavilions. And now we're going to talk a little bit about Jeff Koons Split Rocker. I can point out from these pictures that Split Rocker is a 38-foot tall sculpture. It's got 2 sides to it. Sorry, I got a little cough now. It's got a dinosaur side on the right. It's got a pony side on the left. A lot of different features and elements to make those 2 separate. Really, the kind of the concept of Split Rocker is it was a separation of 2 adults. and there were children involved, and it was talking about slicing a rocker, 2 rocker toys in half and fusing them back together. So it kind of represents just the differences in general of people, how we're all people, but sometimes we don't match up exactly the same. But you can see we use different color annuals for the dinosaur side. We use hot colored annuals. We use pastel color for the pony side. The eyes are looking different directions. One is angular, one is circular. You can come and really check out to see some of those differences. But this is all planted with 24,000 annuals, and we do that in the beginning of May, but it'll be in another 2 weeks when we plant. And it's right in the middle of our native meadow. And this is when it was constructed. Before 2013 is when it opened. So it's 240 stainless steel boxes. All those boxes are put together. On the inside of the box, you can see some drip tube. So the drip tube is how we water those boxes. And then on top of those boxes, the metal grate, the grid is put on that. There's this fabric. So this green kind of felt fabric is then set on top of those boxes. And then they're filled with a soil mixture, and that goes inside the box. And that's a close-up look of the mixture that we put in there. So we really had to go through a lot of experimentation to try to get the right mixture that we wanted for these boxes, because this is a vertical box kind of sitting upright, and you need this. You can't just have regular soil because it's going to sit and it's going to pack down. It's going to get all the air out. And so we tried to find different ways to mix in with it. And the big savior, you can see the fired clay. It's if you're familiar with baseball fields, it's called turfus. That's what they do to enhance the clay of the field, but that is what helps give it some airspace, and it lightens it up a little bit. But it's also got some rice hulls, pine fines, all the things that are listed there to give it a nice light feel. And that also gives it a really good drainage, which is super important. Breaks down slowly. You know, what's the life expectancy of the soil? We thought it was going to be 7 years, but we haven't changed it out. It's 2023, and we started in 13, so we're working on the 11th year with this soil, and the plants are still doing well. We top it off each year because soil falls out the holes, and we're going to keep running with it until we have issues. And this was custom blended by Mark Hyland at Organic Mechanics, which is a good company that we've gotten some materials from. And then you put the fabric on, and then the artist studio came initially, and they drew these lines on the sculpture, and those represent different zones. And then what happens is each side has 5 zones. They're all different. And the zone is made up of 5 to 7 different flowers. And we mix those flowers with a certain recipe that we come up with. And then you stick the zone that goes in the respective spot, you stick that in the sculpture. And so it's kind of like pointillism, a little bit from the art standpoint. But what happens is from the distance, you see kind of the colors blend together. As you get up close, you see all that variety and all the different flowers that go into the blend. And it's made up of, the split rocker is not native. All these flowers, for the most part, there may be a few, but most are just annuals that you could get. It's petunias, it's calibrachoa, it's various species of begonias, New Guinea impatiens, lantana. Lots more annuals that you would see on it. And then you can see we're really strict about who gets to draw lines on the sculpture. This is a top secret property, but that's my son many years ago, and he grabbed a marker, and you know what? Hey, he can do it. We can all do it. It's no problem. But we're not redrawing the lines. Each year we have to darken the lines, and so that's what he's doing. He's not getting creative and making new lines on the sculpture, but he is darkening in the lines because they get faded with the sun. So that's something that's done multiple times a year. And then blending, this is something that'll be happening in about a week. We plant 24,000 flowers on the sculpture. We get in about 32,000 flowers because we have to have spares. And so we have recipe lists for each of these blends. So if you're looking at a tray, these are 72 trays. That means it's a regular plant tray with 72 different holes in it. And then we have a recipe for each of these blends. So let's say it's the third blend, the blend of this one says Dino Medium. So that's going to be the 3 blend in the Dino side. And it may say we have 14 New Guinea impatiens, X amount of geraniums, X amount of whatever, and then we'll pre-blend all of those flats. So we end up with this tray pre-blended with all the flowers that we need in that blend. And so when it comes down to planting time, we can grab that tray, we get up in the lift, there'll be four people in 4 different cherry lifts. And then you're able to take that, it's almost like the you pick what you want out of the tray, and then you put it in the holes for split rocker. And it's a lot easier to do that. If you've pulled flowers out of plant trays, it's much easier when it's already been pulled out. Because if you're up on the sculpture and you're trying to plant this up on the lift, and you're trying to plant this sculpture, and you're trying to squeeze to get different plugs out, it's very difficult. So it's nice that it's pre-blended. They pop right out easy, and we can plant them. I see some marigolds there. I didn't mention that, but marigolds is a big one too. We've had zinnias in there, portulaca in there. And here's a picture of us planting from 2016. And it's pretty, we plant the whole sculpture in 1 week, really focused on 3 days of planting with most of the people. And then we have one technician, that's Chris Ryan, who then finishes off some of the detailed stuff afterwards. And as far as maintenance with split rocker, proactive, organic maintenance, 100% maintained organically. And so when you're doing something like that, when you plant 24,000 flowers really close together, what happens is you're just asking for disease, because you're cramming so many plants so close together and on this sculpture. So we have to be proactive with applications of biofungicides and organic fertilizer. That goes through our drip irrigation. So we've got this system. You can see this dosatron picture of that. We connect that to our drip irrigation, and then we can run the biofungicides and the drip irrigation and the bioorganic fertilizer through this system that goes through the drip irrigation. And really with fungicides, it's super important that you're proactive, because for us, if we were to get a really bad fungus on the sculpture, it would be hard to get rid of. And so we want to keep the fungus, bad funguses out. And to do that, we're constantly trying to inject it with beneficial fungicides to prevent that from happening. Insects, we can spot treat with organic pyrethrins. We can attract and release beneficial insects. I mean, the whole thing attracts all kinds of insects to it, just for the amount of flowers that's on it. Chris, we kind of joke that Chris spends the first 6 to 8 weeks adding plants to the sculpture. In the last 6 to 8 weeks, now he's pulling dead plants out of the sculpture, because it's inevitable. These plants are so close together that they're going to, eventually they choke themselves out, and some of them are going to die. You want to limit overhead watering, just to try to prevent constant wet surfaces that can then cause fungus. And then it really comes down to constant monitoring and action. So if you see an issue, it's all about being proactive. And that's really, when it comes down to organic gardening and organic maintenance, it's all about constant monitoring, so you can try to catch something before it gets out of control. Because a lot of times with organic maintenance, especially with monitoring weeds, you want to get them early so you can get rid of them. If you don't, then they take over, and then you've got a lot of problems. And we've tried everything. This was a bird decoy, and I think it was advertised this ruby eye. You can see that ruby eye. So they were saying that this was for starlings. Starlings would nest into the holes of split rocker, and then they can get pretty territorial, and they would have babies in there. And so we put this bird up there, on the big handle of split rocker to see if it would scare them off. Didn't do too good, but I can tell you, once we planted our real meadows, hawks and birds of prey would actually come to the split rocker, and they sit on the handles, and they're looking at the meadow because they're looking for food. And that was extremely effective to keep the starlings away. So once 2016, 17, when the meadow got established a few years later, it was attracting birds of prey, and that was the most effective deterrent for starlings. And we don't have any starlings now, because these birds are now going up to split rocker and hanging out, looking for food in the meadow. And so that's a quick overview of Jeff Koons Split Rocker, which I'm not sure, because it's still weather dependent. I don't know exactly what level when you're there on the 5th that you're going to see a split rocker, but there will be some activity happening. It may be blending at the environmental center. That's possible. And there may be a little bit of planting, but not the full planting, I don't believe, by then. And that's a shot of our meadow in bloom. All right, so why are native plants important? You can see this picture of the soil food web. What happens in nature is when you let natural cycles happen, then you're able to support all of the circle of life for nature. So when you're able to put organic fertilizer, let's say, into your turf, it doesn't just directly feed the grass. So organic fertilizer is going to get in there and it's going to get broken down by bacteria, by fungi, by nematodes, by insects, by all of these things. And then those nutrients are released to the plants. And so when you get synthetic fertilizer, it's already mixed. So it's water gets on it, it just shoots those nitrates out. It shoots those phosphates out, the potassium, whatever's in that fertilizer. It's like direct injecting the plants. And that's great for the plant to get a quick boost of food, but what it does is it bypasses all in nature. So when you're able to go organic fertilizer, you're able to then create that whole cycle of life in your soil. And that really makes all the difference as far as keeping everything the way it should be in nature. And this soil food web is just a quick example to show you. You know, look at all those arrows. You know, the arrows are directing to everything, is connected to everything. Another thing with native plants is they have this coevolution. So you've got a couple species that have been around together, you know, for thousands of years. And what happens is they build relationships about when something's flowering and when something's going to be eating. And that coevolution is another thing that just when you try to take a non-native plant and you stick it in the same situation, sometimes it still works out, you know, because the insects and the birds, they're still trying to live, they're trying to survive, but they don't have that coevolution. And so a lot of times you're getting a little bit, but you're not getting the full benefit of what those relationships can provide. This is one other example. Native plants, you know, a lot of times they're essentially the only host for many native insects. And really the point of this is talking about the protein insects such as caterpillars. So if you get these native trees, and then they're going to get these native caterpillars on them, and that's what the birds are going to be eating. So the birds need the protein. Birds eat berries, you know, they're going to eat berries from whatever, but that's not the protein that's going to survive the species. So they need these caterpillars. That's what they feed their young. That gives them the protein to survive. And if you look at the amount of native caterpillars that feed on native trees, it's just substantially different than these invasive plants. You know, we like to get non-native plants and we want them to be completely insect-free. We don't want any bugs on them. And if one bug starts eating on them and we're like, oh my gosh, I got to get a spray. I got to spray this bug. And really we want to promote some of these insects on these trees because that's really what's keeping that whole life cycle going for nature. So in quantities, when you know, if the whole thing's taken over by something, it's a different story, but in moderation, it's super important to allow that cycle to happen. And the cycle is set up to happen with native animals, with these native plants. Another quick look at how some of these non-native plants can disrupt. And this is a tricky one because this was a snapshot. This is right off the bridle trail along Sandy Branch. And I took this picture probably a couple years ago, and really to point out that you can see the understory, that's stilt grass. So everything on the forest floor is stilt grass, which is not native. There's a Japanese barberry. I can see second foreground. There's the Russian olive, the Elaeagnus in the foreground. I can see burning bush in the very back with the bright red shrub. And there's a few native things, but really this is probably 95% non-native landscape. And so that's what happens with these invasive plants. They can grow aggressively and they can displace a lot of our native stuff. And so that's also a challenge. And all of these shrubs in this picture were escaped from landscapes, from home landscapes that were picked for that. And then of course you got to put resources in it, trying to get it right. Little or nothing eats them. And really the point of this is the one critter that I'm going to talk about eating things right now is going to be deer. And so in some ways, deer help to affect this particular example because they're not eating these plants that you see. They're not eating the stilt grass. They're not eating the barberry. They're not eating the Elaeagnus. And so deer are also perpetuating this issue, letting things take over. But the aggressive nature of these invasive, non-native invasive plants is one aspect of it. And then the fact that deer are coming in, they're eating all of our native plants, not all of them, but many of them. They're not helping either to do that because they're just out of check. So what are we doing at Glenstone to try to increase our native understories and biodiversities? I'm going to go through this Some of the steps that we go through to get this native understory going that we've done over the past, starting in 2016 and 17. So it's 6 or 7 years, and talk about some of the successes and some challenges that we have. So, and this is also the step we use for native meadows. When you're walking around Glenstone in a few weeks, you're going to be able to see a lot of these understories, and you're going to know what we're doing to try to get them going. Key message: anytime you're growing something from seed, it is extremely important to start with bare soil. When you did a tour today with a group, and when you have competition, your seed can't germinate, it can't succeed. And so you want to start with bare soil. On a big project like this, a lot of our soil was bulldozed and, it was put down bare. But nowadays we don't have that situation. So we're trying to figure out how to organically get bare soil. And that's a challenge. We've tried different methods. Organic herbicides really too expensive and not effective enough. Right now we're using Harley rakes, which just kind of goes through and skims the top off the soil. We don't really want to till up a bunch of areas either, because that can lead to a lot of sediment and erosion issues in the water, which we're trying to prevent that as well. But so we start with bare soil. Verify your seed. That's extremely important. We've had issues where someone comes in, if you put the wrong seed down, you've got that seed. You can't get rid of it. And so what we do, if we have a contractor do something, is we just say, hey, before you put seed down, we need to see it. We got to see that bag. Want to see that tag on that seed to make sure, one, that it's what we want, that what we've talked about. But then for this project, we mixed our own seed and we gave it to the contractor to make sure it was the right seed. All right, you apply the seed. We'll talk about that. First growing season, the whole concept is as it grows, your seed, weeds, really the first season, weeds is the only thing growing. Your seed is just germinating, it's tiny. So the weeds grow, this tall, and then you cut it down to 4 to 6 inches, and you go through the whole year doing that. The whole point is to let light get to the seed that you've put down, let it germinate, give it a chance. This native seed is really, really slow. Second growing season, you're going to monitor your hand cutting weeds. If you do a lot of hand pulling weeds, you displace a lot of the seed that you put down. You pull a weed up and you pull up this big saucer with that weed of all the soil. On top of that soil is all the seed you put down. So you don't want to get rid of that. You need that there. Once you pull that up and you throw it in your bucket or your compost pile, that whole, everything left is just weed seeds. So, and then number most important, you got to be patient. This stuff takes 3 to 5 years to get established. So this quick example, not to go in with these species, but these are the species we're looking at with this. A couple sedges, tufted hairgrass, penstemon, which is a really cool plant, a spiderwort, which is cool, and zizia, also a nice plant. All right, mixing seed. We've mixed seed all kinds of different ways. That's a Harbor Freight concrete mixer on the right, which is also a great seed mixer. And then on the left, when I started out measuring this seed in 2016, I'd been at Glenstone for a year. And I've got my scales. Look, I've got 2 scales in that picture. That's how technical I was. I've got little buckets. I'm measuring out these seeds, to the 0.0 whatever ounce to make sure they're exactly as the spec sheet says. Sometimes I put them in the Tupperware large crate at the bottom, put the lid on, just shake it up. That's for some small seed. Nowadays, sometimes it's just grab a handful and a handful and a handful. There's a lot of flexible. With the rates, you've got some flexibility. You still want to make sure you have the right seed. You don't want to put the wrong seed in there. But if you're dealing with the right seeds, the 0.0 whatever of the ounce is not really necessary. But that's something I've learned over time. So when we're seeding, we've seeded all kinds of different ways. We've seeded with walk-behind spreaders. A lot of this, you talk about some of this meadow seed, like little blue stem, which is a meadow grass. It's real fluffy seed, and so it won't work with the standard broadcast spreaders. And so we're using like this little yellow spreader that's got a little hand crank, and it's got a big auger in it. You can kind of see the top of that auger that helps pull the fluffy seed down. So a lot of times when you're doing this meadow seed, it's too fluffy for standard spreaders. And then if you can look on the right, that's called hydro seeding. And that's where you mix the seed in this mixture, kind of like a cellulose newspaper and a sticky tack. And then you just kind of shoot it out through the hose. Notice we had nice bare soil where we're putting that seed down. Very, very important. First growing season, this is what you got. All you're looking at in this picture is either the cover crop, which was probably a grain or a ryegrass, or you're looking at weeds. That's it. So if you're let's say I have people and we're talking about seeding, and I have bosses and they're like, I can't wait to see this product that you're putting down. Really looking forward to see it. They come down that first year, you got to set expectations. You're like, hey, let me tell you what's going to happen the first year. Nothing's going to happen the first year. It's just going to be the weeds, and it's going to be the cover crop that we put down. And if we look inside of that, hopefully we'll see some small things germinating. So that's what you got. Setting those expectations is important, so the customer or your boss, knows exactly what's going to, or your founders, going to know exactly what's going to happen. All right, in the first growing season. So this is the whole throughout the year. The stuff got tall. We cut it down to 4 to 6 inches. And this is what you got. This when people walk up to your building, they're excited about your product. They're excited about your meadow. And they come over and they look at it and they're like, well, that's not too good. And you're like, well, yes and no. But what's really good about this picture, one, is that you can still see a lot of light getting to the ground. That's super important. Number two, it's brown. Brown is really good when you're growing seed and meadow, because that means all your weeds, they're warm season weeds and they've been frosted, so they're not there anymore. Cool season weeds are really tough because they're green all the time. But you like these warm season weeds that grow, and then when they get frosted, they're down. But what's awesome about the picture on the left is that you can see a lot of brown, you see a lot of soil. Take a closer look on this picture on the right, and now we know our seed mix, and we can see little sedges growing, and we can see penstemon, that's the purple leaf, the kind of purpley green leaf. So when you take a closer look, you can actually finally, this has been a year later, you can finally see some of the stuff that you seeded is germinating. That's when you're like, that's great. That's what we want to see. So that's a success, even though it looks terrible. All right, second growing season. Now you're not mowing it anymore, but you're monitoring. And these are just a couple examples. On the left, the weeds are in quotations up top because this plant on the left, which is mare's tail, Erigeron canadensis, is a native plant. And so, and it's a pioneer plant. So when it gets open space, the seeds are in the soil, it just germinates. That's what it does. It takes over like open fields and things. But in this situation, we don't want this native plant there because it's still shading out all of our seedlings. And so you can't pull this. If you hand pulled it, you would pull up all your seedlings. So we would go through and just mow it. We would weed eat it down in areas that we had it. And then an example of this common vetch on the right, that's something you have to pull, because if you don't get rid of it, it just takes over an area. So we went into that area and just hand pulled it out. But it's knowing your weed, knowing what you can do to get rid of it. That vetch, it grows a lot up top. It doesn't have a huge root issue underneath. So you can get it out without disturbing too much soil. All right, years 2 to 4, we're just blasting through 17, 18, and 19 for this example. But the key of this is you can just to see how these plants develop and how many years it takes to develop. So you can see the white flowers of penstemon, you can see the blue flowers of the spiderwort, and then you can see the green grass, which is really sedge, growing in the mix. So if you look in 2017, year 2, still pretty small. You can see year 3 where it's a little bit bigger. And then year 4, you've really got an impressive native understory that's starting to really flourish. And May's a really good season for this particular understory because the spiderwort and the penstemon are both blooming at the same time. But you start to get to year 4, and also the weeds are starting to blow in. And so this is also another picture. This is October of the same spot. And so in this situation, it's just showing that you're going to go through phases with these native understories. It's not pristine landscape. We're trying to duplicate what we feel is an authentic native landscape, somewhat authentic to Maryland, but also with deer presence. And so that's what we're working on here. So we still have to go in. You can see some stilt grass coming in, maybe some mile a minute coming in, weeds. You still got to get in there and try to get these things out at that point. But now you get to year 5 again, we're right back where we started. So these landscapes bounce back, these understories bounce back. And then there was actually some Deschampsia that came in year 5. So and then in the middle, you can see common milkweed. That's not something that was seeded. That's something that nature put there. And we are always welcoming any aggressive native plant to come into our landscapes. It's all about patience, letting whatever comes up get time so you can actually figure out if it's good or it's bad. And then, if it's bad, you got to take care of it. If it's good, now then celebrate. You got nature put something there, and many times nature puts a plant there. We're looking at it and we're like, hey, we need to get this plant. We need to get more of this plant because it's doing really successful from what nature put there. And the similar concept for the meadows. So this is a picture of a 45-acre meadow. Not where you just learn the process. It's the same process for meadows. This is right after you get through the arrival hall checking in. This is your big aha moment when you get to Glenstone and you're in the middle of a 45-acre native meadow. You see the pavilion is kind of appearing on the right, and it's a really nice way to showcase the property's expanse when you're able to get to that point. Another picture of our pavilion's meadow. This particular meadow was seeded and plugged. So we kind of cheated with this one right on structure, but this meadow is just absolutely fantastic. So nice. That's goldenrod, that's speciosa, solidago speciosa on the left. You can see some of the brown dots. That's a rattlesnake master. That's another really cool native plant. When this thing's in bloom, it's just covered with pollinators, millions of pollinators on the property. There's little blue stem, purple top grass in there. There's some more. I see some different goldenrod. But all right, another example, just bringing it back to the coevolution, what some of these meadow plants can do. This is an example everybody knows. It's the monarch butterfly and then the caterpillars. I mean, growing up, these monarchs, thousands of years to develop this relationship with these milkweeds to the point where they're eating the leaves of milkweed, so they're toxic, so the birds won't eat them, which is just, that's an amazing example of how nature has co-evolved with each other in a way to help each of these plants flourish. So these were some pictures from our property of some monarchs and then some the caterpillars eating the leaves. And we do common milkweed. We don't seed that, it comes up on its own. We do the tuberosa, which is the orange flower on the left. We've done also swamp milkweed. We've got a lot of that, which has also done really well. Really cool plants. And slenderleaf milkweed, we've got some of that as well. So a quick design overview of the property. This is from Adam Greenspan, who is a design partner of PWP. That's Peter Walker and Partners Landscape Architecture out of California. Why do we have a landscape architecture firm out of California, you may ask? What's an interesting story, when the gallery was being constructed back in 2000, probably 4 or 2005, the architect, Charles Gwathmey, he had worked with PWP Landscape Architecture on a project in Texas. So when he was building the gallery, he brought to the founder's attention that, hey, I've worked with this great landscape architecture firm. You should meet them and check them out. And then that got them an introduction, and they really liked what they were saying. It started out as just, hey, come and talk about the gallery, but really what they brought to it was a whole big picture look of the whole property at that time. And I really liked what they were saying and the developments that they came up with, and they're still with the property today. So they've been around from the 20 to 30 acre property to the 300 acre property. And we have a really good relationship. That's super important too. So what they do is they come up with design intent. So they come up with the feel. What's the feel when you get here that you're supposed to be seeing? Our job as a horticulture team is making that feel come alive. So we're the ones who are saying, hey, let's put these plants in, let's try these plants out. And they lean on us for that aspect. We're the ones maintaining these things. But it's their full vision, the feeling as you walk through property. We are kind of a curated landscape, but we're a very wild landscape, so it balances out. So we're curated in how we try to create it, how it's set up. So as you move through the property, you go through different horticulture rooms. And then we want it to support the art, architecture, nature of the property. But you can see the design overview. We want to take visitors, we want to slow them down from the way they're moving through life. From the entrance, you got a lot of curved driveways, you've got curved paths. You go through an alley of trees. This is good. You're gonna slip from one world to another. All right. Leave the car, you walk into the trees, and then you walk across the meadow. All about a procession. You really have to make an effort to experience nature before you even see the art at Glenstone. For those who've been there, are like, absolutely you do. But opening up the spaces as in the building at a much larger scale. And that's about landscape and about time. And now we're going to finish up with a photo tour of just a little bit of Glenstone that you'll come through, and then we'll have some time if there are questions or comments. So this is when you come in this wall. We had a group of wallers from Yorkshire, England came down. And so they were English wallers. and they built this. This is Carter Rock stone from the local Carter Rock quarry, which is down there near River Road and the Beltway. And they came down, and I can tell you when they were down here from England, it rained every day they were here, which I guess they were probably coming here expecting to have nice, dry, warm weather, but they didn't. We had a tent over them wherever this section of wall they're working on. We had a big pop-up tent, and we would move it along with them to try to keep them as dry as they could when they built this wall. This is all dry laid, so it's not fused together at all, and just amazing how they worked. It's a really nice crafted wall that they built. There's the arrival hall and a nice picture of the pedestrian bridge right before you get into the meadow. Picture of the pavilions and some of the meadow. That's a Coreopsis lanceolata and Penstemon digitalis. And then a picture of the gallery. Again, that's the original museum on the right. This left picture of the cafe path was taken just a couple weeks ago. That's a really nice native plant called Pachyra aurea. I have seen it, and I can't remember the street, but I've saw it at another house in town. We've got some at our house. I saw another house up the road getting closer to Tractor Supply. They were showcasing some Pachyra aurea as well. And then that's a Sherwood purple phlox. And then we've got two restaurants, the cafe, which is next to the picture on the left, and then the patio, where you can get some cappuccinos, former pool house, and that's some sedge in the foreground. Both of these pictures have the large Columbia plane tree, which is half native sycamore, half not native, selected for disease resistance. So we were able to go half native in this situation because we really needed the sycamores to have anthracnose resistance, which is a bad fungus that causes stress and early defoliation. Picture of one of our boardwalks. We have a new boardwalk behind this one with a Richard Serra 4 Rounds exhibition that just opened up last June, which is also really cool. This is a really neat plant called lizard tail mixed with some sedge. And then there's a picture of the bridle trail. And then finally, some of the wildlife that we bring from Glenstone. Got a heron. We've got lots of foxes. They come out all the time. And some nice birds of prey. And yes, everyone's favorite, herds and herds of deer. If you want to see deer, you just come to Glenstone. We've got them. If you don't have enough here in Poolesville, they have healthy appetites as well. Lots of turkeys, and there's split rocker in the distance. And then some Asclepias tuberosa as well. All right, well, thank you very much. That's just a little overview, hopefully, to get you excited about your trip in 2 weeks. And I'm here to help answer any questions or comments that you may have. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matt. That was really fascinating presentation. So yes, feel free to unmute if you have questions. That would be great.
Matt, I was just wondering will you have to replace the fabric on the split rocker at some point? And if so, how long does that take?
That's a great question. And when we do it, it's going to take a few months. It's going to be when it was initially installed, it was scaffolding all around the building. That's very invasive. Scaffolding it's a real thing. Replacing all that fabric is a big job. So we have it mapped out, the steps we would take. We thought we were going to have to change the fabric out a couple years ago, and I was crossing my fingers that we wouldn't have to, because it's just such a big job with a lot of unknowns because we've never done it. But what happens right now is we're playing around with just taking the worst spots of the sculpture and replacing small sections of fabric. So what you'll see when you come out there, you can look at the sculpture and you'll see where we've done that this year, where we've replaced sections that were, some sections get more sun, and so they're going to wear down faster, because you get the sun, you get exposed to the sun weakens the fabric, and those handles get weakened where the hawk, the hawk comes in and lays on the two handles on the side, and the talons are just like, he's grabbing hold of those handles and so he's keeping the starlings away, which is awesome. And they're really nice because we love the birds, but they put a hurting on the handles because they shred it with their talons. And so now instead of a full change out. We're just changing out as needed, knowing that there's a tolerance for a little bit of patchy, dark green where the fabric is new and lighter green where it's old, where it gets a little bit more faded. And throughout the season, though, we've found that it blends pretty quick, and that it's something that we're all okay to keep exploring that avenue. So hopefully we can do this forever. But if the soil goes bad, then we will have to exchange the fabric and the soil.
Oh, wow.
So we're always watching how the plants do. The soil is the other aspect of that. So even if the fabric is okay and the plants start getting a lot of disease, we'll have to, and when we do the soil, we'll do the full fabric replacement as well.
Thank you.
But hopefully never is my answer.
I have a question. First, thanks so much. This was terrific. Couple questions. When the first meadow was, or the meadows up on the hill where the trees were placed away from the pavilion, I understand that was a seeded meadow and it took several years to establish. Was the turf or whatever was growing there scraped off, or did you use solarizing, film or what?
So most of the, the 45 acres, the only place we didn't seed it was just right on structure. So most of the
Right.
meadow was all seeded. And all the project side, so we had a huge section of meadow, I'm going to say 25 acres, that was all shaped with bulldozers.
Mhm.
And so that was bare soil because of equipment. But on the original side, so that's probably 15, maybe that's 15 acres. On the original side, that was a side that was already Glenstone. That was a pasture. And so we were trying to get that pasture organically ready for this meadow. So what we did then is we flail it. So flail it is like a tractor attachment that's got a bunch of tiny little sickles on it.
Mhm.
And so it goes round and round, and the sickles just beat down all the plants. And so it's different from a blade. It's like these things just spin, and so they just keep beating down everything. And so we're cutting. So you just cut it really low, and a flail can go really low. So you're cutting as low as you can. And you do that throughout the season. And what that does is it weakens the cool season grass because it's trying to grow, and then the sun beats down on it. And you're cutting it really low, stressing it out. Now we cut cool season grass really low on sports fields all the time. And people play sports on them forever, so grass is pretty tolerant. And then we hit it with a vinegar product to see if we could then zap it. We thought we had it pretty good. And we could walk and see footprints and see soil. And we were like, hey, we're ready to seed, because that was really the first time we seeded anything. That was in 2016 with the original meadow. But what happens was we did not prep it enough. And if I could go back in time, I would go back to that meadow and say, we're not ready to seed because there's still too much competition. And so it wasn't bare soil. It was 60% bare. But as you know, cool season grass like fescue or whatever, it grows back so fast. And I just showed you that seed takes 2 to 3 years to get established. And if you allow competition that's not fully dead to come back, which it did, then now the seed doesn't get light, it doesn't get nutrients, all that stuff. And so you can, I could show you sections on our original meadow that's just far inferior to the other side where we were bare soil. How would we do it now is a good question. I think I would probably try to use a Harley rake, which is a skid steer attachment that just skims the surface. And we're playing with that. We're doing seed prep in other areas to see if that's viable. The challenge with such a large area to solarize it is that you got to have a lot of plastic, a lot of plastic. And so then we're always like, well, is that good? Having like acres of plastic that you then have to pick up, and then it's all tore up and you got to throw it away. We're always trying to figure out what the best option is. Using a Harley rake, though, on a large scale, when you're disturbing acres and acres of soil, then that also involves sediment and erosion permits and plans, and it gets really complicated. So right now we're doing some tests with small sections where you can, legally skim the surface off because you're not doing a huge area, to see what kind of results that we get. Because you got to get that crown with the fescue. The blades are up here, and you got that crown of grass right below the surface. That's what you got to get, because if you don't get that, it keeps coming back forever.
And finally, quickly, you don't use herbicide like any Roundup or anything, or what are you going to do with the stilt grass then? I mean, what?
So stiltgrass is a huge challenge. That's a really good question. So we'll use some organic herbicides. So we'll use some acids, product like Scythe. We've got a product called Torch that's got a little bit of systemic, and if it weeds little, you can get it. The problem with stiltgrass is it's not just one little, it's like thousands and thousands of little stiltgrass. You can take one of those organic herbicides when it's little, like right now, when it's this big, and you can overspray, you can spray around your plants and knock down the little seedlings. It's when it gets big, then you can't, but we are going to do some trials this year where you take one thing in your favor with organic herbicides is sometimes they're really ineffective, which is the truth. And so we're going to play around, and a weed like stiltgrass is really easy to pull. It's also not a super tough plant. Its job is just to grow as fast as it can in like 3 or 4 months, make seed and go away. And it pulls really easy, doesn't even root in much, but it's so aggressive and it's so good at seeding in its own thatch and being tough and just taking over where it's nothing but stiltgrass. And then, that the area gets bigger and then takes over. But we're going to do some trials where if you take half rate of an organic herbicide and overspray, so it's not a rate that would hurt a plant that's a perennial, but would it hurt the stiltgrass? But end of the day, or a synthetic or not, you just don't want to overspray acres and acres of anything with anything,
Right.
Because it's still going to have some effect on the insects, some effect on the soils. I mean, it can't not, because it's an acid. Even if it's organic, high concentrations of anything, or it can have a negative reaction. So we've got places of stilt, we hand pull it. If it's a high priority area, like at the rival hall, we're hand pulling stilt grass. So we go through and you're just trying to pull it desirable plants. We've got other places like on the bridle trail where we just are not going to get rid of stilt grass, but we've got other plants. We've got a plant called emery sedge that we've got coming in this year. And it's a really aggressive sedge that we found, is really tough, and it spreads. It's a sedge, native sedge that spreads. And we're going to pull out a little circle of stiltgrass and put a little circle of emery sedge, and then we're going to see what happens. And we're like, sometimes if you start little with a small circle, and then we're going to see, does that circle get bigger, or does it just get overtaken by stiltgrass?
Right.
And we're going to try that with a couple different plants that have been proven to be aggressive. We need, when we pick plants, if they're not aggressive enough, Pennsylvania sedge is but it's not good for us because it's just too little. And we've put it out and just got overtaken by weeds. And we're like, well, that's an 18-inch by 18-inch sedge. And it's a pretty sedge and it's nice. But for us, we need the 36-inch by 36-inch sedge. We need the big sedge because it can maybe take over 3 feet of space. And something else we're finding is that all these trees we planted, as they grow and develop, then your understory loses light. And all of these native plants, they need light. Even shade native plants need light. And if you're in the dense shade, your list of aggressive plants goes way down, because and when the plant can't be aggressive, then you know what's going to come in. They will be an aggressive weed for every situation. Sometimes it's stilt grass, sometimes it's hairy joint grass, sometimes it's creeping thistle, could be bull thistle, could be lespedeza, could be sweet clover. You pick your environment, and then in your yard you're going to have a different really bad weed. Here I've got that ground ivy in Poolsville, and I've got mugwort. Those are just terrible weeds to try to get rid of. And that's even I have used Roundup or a similar product just to test it out, and it's even tough for that. I mean, these plants are not at Glenstone, not at Glenstone, but I've tried it in my yard here, and just to see, because we're talking about the worst of the worst weeds, and sometimes even the synthetic stuff doesn't work on it. But it's a fun challenge at Glenstone to try to get this stuff done organically. It really is. And it's depressing sometimes, but it is really a fun challenge to be able to say, hey, let's see what we can come up with, team. We got nothing to lose, let's keep trying things. And we've got a lot of trials going this year. So lots of fun.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat that says, you said you try to control water from above on Split Rocker. How is that possible? Do you water the sculpture from the ground? but rain falls over everything. How do you deal with that?
So I mean, rain is fine. It's just trying to limit, and even because of the nature of the sculpture, we have drip irrigation, able to water from inside the boxes. So we can get most of the roots watered from drip irrigation. That being said, when you get to the very top, and my head is now Split Rocker. When you get to the very top of Split Rocker, you know, it gets hot and it gets dry, and then Split Rocker has dry spots, you know, in different places. So like in the morning, you're up there, you're going to take a hose and you're going to, you know, the handles, you know, place that's hanging over the sculpture and exposed to air, you're going to have to hose to overwater some of these places, and that's okay. You know, it's not like you immediately overwater an annual and it gets fungus, but it's just something to keep in mind. You do it in the morning when there's dew on the ground, so you're not extending, you know, you're trying to keep within the already wet period, but it's definitely okay to do some overwatering. We just try to not do that full time. So we utilize the drip irrigation as much as we can, but you still have the hot spots in some areas that get exposed. You still need to get extra water on, and we'll do that by watering over the top.
Are there any other questions?
As long as you know the rules, you can break the rules when it comes to plants. So as long as you know what you're trying to do, sometimes there's flexibility that within that, you know, to do other things. But
what do you get from the landscape architect? Do they give you like specific plans, or they just say we want a sea of you know, of grasses out there, or what do they do?
So initially we had a set of plans, you know, with the whole project, with the expansion of pavilions. We were fairly specific plans, and they work with consultants. Like we work with Larry Weiner out of Pennsylvania, who's a meadow consultant. I've worked with him, you know, he started at being a consultant at Glenstone about when I started in 2015 or right, maybe 16. And so really good to work with those people. But what happens is even that initial plan, I mentioned the Pennsylvania sedge as an example. You know, we planted a lot of Pennsylvania sedge, and then in 2017 we were like, hey, this plant's not going to work. It's getting way too many weeds already. And as the way we did you don't open everything at once. It was such a huge expansion. So you're opening like an acre section at a time all over property that worked out with construction. And so you're planting this section over here, you're planting this section over here. There was a lot of hay-scented fern, a lot of New York fern, and then that's a fern that goes dormant in October. You know, and we opened the pavilions in October. And so we learned the year before, so we opened the pavilions in 2018. We learned in 2017, we're like, man, half of this property is going dormant, you know, right now. And we're opening in next year. We can't have everything going dormant, you know, in October when that's our grand opening. And so we shifted gears, and that's when we started going to the fox sedges and the tussock sedges and the shallow sedges. We started expanding the sedges. And then with the fern, we went with bigger, sturdier ferns. Like Christmas fern is a really good fern because it stays green longer. The wood fern are really good. They stay, you know, they're just something that's going to stay green into the later months. If you can get a nice section of hay-scent fern, New York fern, those are, you know, you walk out in some trails at Seneca Park and you see a huge section of these fern and you're like, that's pretty amazing. But fern can be tricky. And we have a high pH soil, so all the fern is not too happy about that. And then on paper, you know, the plan says this is a wooded area, therefore we're going to plant fern. But when you plant these trees, it's not a wooded area when you initially plant big trees, and the sunlight was baking, you know, really coming in some of these areas. And so some of it was too hot, you know, for some fern. But our job at that point then is to say, hey, you know, PWP, this is what's been working, you know, this year. Every year we're trying new plants. We want native, we want deer resistant. That's really, and we want aggressive. Those are the three things that we want to look at. I did make a note of my favorite plants that fit those criteria. Pachyra aurea, fantastic plant. Pacnanthinum muticum is a blunt-nosed mountain mint. And if you've ever played with mountain mints in your yard, that's another great one. Penstemon digitalis, we mentioned Scutellaria incana, which is skullcap. That's another really good deer resistant, kind of early summer blue color, which is hard to come by. And I like Speciosa goldenrod, really good. And from a shrub standpoint, pawpaw. Not a good landscape plant because it's so open, but if you can get pawpaw is just an awesome plant in general. but not, not necessarily around the house, because it's just so open and it can be pretty leggy and big. But the deer don't eat pawpaw. You can plant a small pawpaw and they may rub it with their antlers and destroy it. And so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm drifting with landscape architecture. Is they're going to say, hey, in this, we just did a project 4 rounds, and they kind of give the feel, and then we come in and we say, you know what, this is how we need to do it. We're going to take gallon-sized plants and we're going to mix it into this existing wetland that's got fescue and stilt grass in it, because we're not going to denude the wetland, and stuff's going to come back. So let's see if we can find aggressive plants, that we can get going in these areas. And so in those situations, they come up with the feel, we come up with how to make it work. And we have a really good relationship now where that regularly happens. It took a while to get there, but we definitely did.
Are there any other flower sculptures at Glenstone besides the Split Rocker?
Just Split Rocker.
Oh,
That's our only annual bed. I like to joke that we have one annual bed at Glenstone, and it's 24,000 flowers, and that's it. The rest of it's all wild native stuff.
do you think they'll ever put any more there, or?
You never know. If something really cool came out, it's cool there, because you never know. We've got a lot of cool horticulture opportunities. So I would never say never about anything, but it's a really fun place to be, and it keeps us on our toes.
Are there any other questions?
I was wondering, what is the best time of year to really see the meadows at work, do you think?
So our meadows are warm season meadows, and so they're going to do their best activity when it's hot. So when you get into July's a good month. Early July, the meadows aren't necessarily super full, but they do a lot of growth in June. I like early July because Split Rocker is fantastic in early July, and the meadows are coming on really nice in early mid-July. I think that's my favorite time. August is cool for meadows, but sometimes it can get really, really hot, and you're out there in the meadow and you're baking. And if you don't get rain in August, we've had rain the last few years in the meadow, kind of, these plants kind of shrivel up a little bit, so you don't get the full effect. But July, I'd say mid-July is a really good time.
Thank you.
But all the seasons are nice, but I like that for meadows and Split Rocker.
Any other questions? Well, that was a really fascinating presentation. Who knew that all that went into the work you guys do there? So thank you for sharing that with us. It was really great having you here.
Yeah, it was great. It's great. Thanks for everybody for listening, and look forward to your visit out to Glenstone.
Thank you. That was great.
Super.
Thank you.
Yes, we do have that scheduled for anybody that didn't know. It's going to be on May 5th at 10 a.m. and there's still some spots available. So make sure you register for that on our website. And while you're there, also check out, we have a jazz concert and social coming up on the 29th with a master pianist. And we also have Holocaust survivor Herbert Haynes scheduled for a Zoom presentation on May 4th. So you could find all of that on our website. And you can also contact us if you have questions at info@poolsvilleseniors.org. So please feel free to unmute if you'd like to say thank you and bye to Matt.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Matt.
Matt.
Yep.
Thank you very
Great
much.
presentation.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks everybody. I look forward to seeing you around town.
Will do.
Great. Bye.
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 All right. Thank you.
Thank you.